Our cyber report is our consumer impact and business impact report. And we look at 3 distinct populations and discuss their experience. We talk with victims who have contacted the Identity Theft Resource Center, the general population, and small businesses. And we go much deeper than just the financial harm, but those financial losses are increasing. And we had 28% of our victims, and these are ITRC victims, that lost under $500. A 27% lost between $500 and $1,000, but 12% lost more than $10,000. And of that, we are seeing more and more people losing hundreds of thousands of dollars and even millions of dollars. I am shocked at the number of cases that we started getting in 2024, where the losses these are for individuals, not businesses, where the losses were over $1 million. And small businesses are reporting an increase in financial losses of over $500,000, and that doubled from the previous year. And as a reminder, there are secondary impacts. The victims are often experiencing difficulty paying bills, securing loans. They see the interest rate on their current and legitimate credit card accounts increasing, and they can sometimes have trouble keeping or finding employment. So it also has long-term financial implications. Over half of general consumers reported that their PII was stolen or misused. No surprise after James's report. But this, in the last 12 months, this is a sharp increase from the 30% that reported that to us in the previous year. Nearly 7% of ITRC victims have been victimized multiple times. So that's that re-victimization rate that I've talked about in years past. That's up from 29%. So we're not only seeing increasing rates, we're seeing people victimized multiple times in a single year. Only 19% of general consumers and 21% of ITRC victims did not receive a data breach notice in 2024. And that's a significant drop from 44% in 2023. Now, the emotional toll of identity crimes, in case you're thinking that these reactions are only for a small subset of the cases, oh, this is only for very complex cases, 95% of ITRC victims and 87% of general consumer victims reported experiencing emotional impacts. They feel worried and anxious, more than half, 53%. 33% felt violated. 20% felt isolated and unable to trust others. And 12% of victims considered suicide. Oh, I'm a little disappointed with how that formatted. You can't read some of these quotes, but the statistics only tell part of the story. Behind these numbers, there's a person who's faced that emotional and personal challenge. Identity crimes impact mental health, finances, personal trust, and leaving victims to often feel isolated and overwhelmed. And that's evidenced by the number of victims that reported feeling suicidal and thinking about suicide. You can see from this first quote that we are starting to have real experience within our contact center, hearing from the family members of loved ones who have actually killed themselves because of what's happened to them. This is a very disturbing trend, and unfortunately, I think it's going to continue to occur. And I don't have this in my remarks, but based on some of the events of yesterday, we're looking at grant funding being paused right now. And that is a very scary proposition for organizations like mine, where 40% of our budget is from federal grants. This is support for crime victims. They need accessible trauma-informed care if we want to reduce these numbers. And so I'm happy to have conversations about how some of these activities are impacting our ability to provide those services. Now, with that, we do have our victim. She should be calling in. Who are my IT people that have, do we have Linda on the line?
We do.
Oh, there's Linda. This is great. Everybody, I'd like you to welcome Linda. She's going to, I'm sorry, let me get to my notes here. I really appreciate Linda being here virtually. We had some travel issues and I'll just let you take it away. Can you start with telling us a bit more about yourself and your background, and then we'll dive into what happened.
Yes, but before I do that, I just wanted to tell James that while he was speaking, I ordered my Savannah banana tickets. So thank you for that. I'm a journalist. For more than 35 years, I worked at the Boston Globe on staff as a reporter and an editor. Now I'm a freelance correspondent, a regular correspondent for the Globe Sunday magazine, and I also make documentary films. Much of my Globe work has been investigative in nature. Back in the early 90s, I was one of the first reporters to uncover sexual abuse within the Catholic Church. But it never occurred to me that someday I'd be investigating a crime against myself. But that's what happened, exactly what happened in my case.
Thanks for that, Linda. Let's go ahead and start with what happened. Walk us through first how you discovered that you were a victim and then what took place.
Yeah, so it happened 2.5 years ago. A stranger took $5,000 of my money in cash from a branch of Bank of America in Saratoga Springs, New York, which is about 200 miles from where I live. And this sent me on a 2-year odyssey to figure out and document in a cover story for the Boston Globe how this happened and who was impersonating me and how to get to the bottom of it. I'd first noticed the money was missing in June of 2022. It was missing from my checking account, and it was just a few days, maybe 3 days after my daughter's wedding, and I was back online paying bills for the wedding. And I saw that $5,000 was missing from my checking account. And according to the transaction, it said it was a teller transaction, which meant it wasn't an ATM transaction. Somebody gave them the money. This was horrifying to me. I didn't even know where to begin to fix this. First, there was the matter of my money, which for me was a significant chunk, especially since I hadn't finished paying for the wedding yet. And then there was a sinking feeling after I started thinking about what happened. Maybe this was my own fault. Maybe it was my own carelessness. And maybe it happened during the wedding. Before the wedding started, before the guests arrived, I left my purse on a chair in the venue to join my family outside to take photos. And there were a lot of people inside the venue setting up the tables and so on. And I also sort of putting pieces together afterwards. I sort of had this hazy feeling that when I looked in my wallet sometime in the day or two before or after the wedding, my debit card wasn't in its normal place. So maybe that's what happened. I'll never know. I know I'll never know. But then I began to panic even more. I mean, what other information might they have taken from my wallet? And what personal information do they have now? Um, so the first thing I did within minutes was call my financial advisor, who told me to act quickly to limit the damage. In There's a name for this. In the fraud world, they call it the cleanup, but I came to think of it as a circle of hell because for days upon days on end, it just devoured my life. And I came to see why there's an FTC booklet that's called "What to Do If Your Identity Is Stolen," and it's 62 pages long. My work included shutting down my bank account, opening a new one, canceling all my cards, ordering new checks, changing my login credentials, notifying all the places that I could think of where my account was digitally connected, freezing my credit through the 3 credit reporting agencies, filing a report with my city's police department, and most of my energy went into fighting very hard with Bank of America to get my money back. And it wasn't long before I came to see that the Bank of America had no interest in helping me or offering any sort of support. Dealing with the bank was one of the worst and most frustrating parts of this whole ordeal. Until I learned I'd been re-victimized. Someone had set up a tech company, an LLC called Asastari Tech at my address, and soon my mailbox was filling up with junk mail addressed to them. That is when I contacted the Identity Theft Resource Center Victim Services Department. I'd read about it in a New York Times article. And they spoke to me at length and calmed me down and gave me great advice and suggested things that there is no way I could have ever thought of on my own, like reporting this business to the Secretary of State's Corporation Division, contacting my city's licensing department to see if somebody had actually licensed the business in my jurisdiction, contacting the Mass Department of Revenue and the IRS. So
That sounds like quite the odyssey, Linda. You know, you mentioned that you touched on it a little bit when you said one of your initial reactions was feeling like, oh my gosh, what did I do? This might be my fault. That's a really common feeling and reaction that a lot of victims have. We want to make sure that we message people and let them know that there's nothing to be ashamed or embarrassed about. But let's talk a little bit more about that. And I appreciate you setting the stage because I know, because we've had so many conversations, but that's not all. There's more to this story, folks. And so I'll let Linda get into that. But while you're telling us what are some of the additional steps that you had to take in this ongoing odyssey, how else did you feel while all of this was happening?
well, I was really gutted, and it wasn't a feeling that really has disappeared. It's dissipated. But to this day, when I log on to my banking account, my heart just starts pounding, because I'm always waiting for something, for the next shoe to drop. It was infuriating and it was terrifying, and many sleepless nights. I had many sleepless nights envisioning all sorts of dodgy scenarios that could befall me. Was I going to lose my credit? I mean, you alluded to them all in your previous talk. What was going to happen to me? The more I read about it, the more I just foresaw doomsday. But as I said, the lackadaisical response from Bank of America made me really. I don't know how many ways I can say infuriated, but I was just, as we say here in Boston, I was bullshit. For weeks on end, I kept calling the bank's fraud department, and they consistently put me on hold for at least an hour, and sometimes longer. And then finally, they come back and would tell me they were investigating it, and it was going to take 60 to 90 days. For what? And then as the deadline for 60 to 90 days approached, they switched it to 60 to 90 business days. So by the end of August, so this is nearly 3 months after the theft, I was fed up. Um, I was seeing that this was a delaying tactic, and I couldn't stand this crap any longer. So one day, Saturday morning, also, I guess I have to confess that the reporter in me saw that there was a story here. So I packed my bag early in the morning and got in my car and drove 350 miles, 2.5 hours, or sorry, 3.5 hours, 200 miles to the Bank of America in Saratoga Springs, fuming all the way down the Massachusetts Turnpike. And I stopped at the police department and filed a report with them. And then I walked over to the bank. And when I got into the bank, my head was really full of steam. I was ready to blow. And the manager said, "Oh, how can I help you?" And I caused an impressive commotion and just yelled and said, "Do you want me to tell everybody in this lobby how somebody stole money from that teller bank over there and you won't give my money back?" So she quickly escorted me back to her office, and I told her the story. And she looked up the transaction and confirmed that someone had indeed come to the bank on that particular date and spoken to a teller, presenting what appeared to be a driver's license, and then correctly answered some authentication questions to validate my account. So she said, well, that was strange. And so she got on the phone herself to the same fraud department. I was surprised that there wasn't another course for her to take. But it was the same thing. She had the same long wait until she finally they came back to her and said the same thing, 60 to 90 business days. And she got off the phone and just said, this is ridiculous. And she placed a call to one of the vice presidents of Bank of America in Albany. And she put me on the phone with him, and he promised to escalate it. And then 3 days later, my money was back in my bank account. So of course I was glad, but I was still mad. I mean, how many people have the luxury of being able to do that? And um, and now I had more to worry about, since now I knew that somebody had a fake driver's license in my name. And I'd already started learning about, what happens when fraudsters get their hands on identity information. And I had learned about synthetic identities and how bad guys can create fake credit cards and credit reports and build an alternative me that makes them own my identity. So fortunately, the police in Saratoga Springs took this very seriously. And it turned out that they discovered that the bank had a video with the transaction and surveillance images of the theft. And an investigator described to me what was on it. And she described that an older woman with dark hair, a cane, approached the bank teller. They chatted, and they chatted pleasantly. The woman handed over a photo ID, and then another type of card. And then the teller just counted out my money. So this, of course, made me wonder, if there was a video surveillance, why didn't they just look at it and confirm it wasn't me? But just about a full year after the crime took place, I got another call from the police department that through facial recognition technology, the woman was recognized by another police department. The Saratoga Springs police had shared it across New York State with other police departments. Turns out that she was well known to police across the state for presenting fake IDs at various banks in always different banks in always different counties, and getting cash for them. Once in a while, she'd be successful, but more often than not, the banks would recognize that these were fake, and they'd call the police. She'd be arrested and then not show up for her arraignment. In fact, just excuse me, just 2 days before she stole my money, she had been sentenced to 5 years probation for a 2019 offense in another county. Same trick, different bank, but it didn't work and she was arrested. So soon, within a month, say, police called me again and said she'd been arrested. They found her in the Bronx, and she was being arraigned the next morning in Saratoga Springs. Could I be there? Back in the car, I hit the road again. And it was a Saturday morning. And the woman I describe in my report only as Deborah, because in today's rage-filled climate and vindictive climate, I do fear retribution. She showed up at a Saratoga Springs courthouse charged with 2 felonies: grand larceny in the 3rd degree for stealing over $3,000, and identity theft. She was in a wheelchair. She pleaded guilty and she apologized to me. And as they wheeled her out past me, she mouthed the words, "I'm sorry." And yet, despite all the charges against her, and even though she was already on probation, she wasn't held in custody because New York State had recently passed a bail reform law, which eliminates the requirement for defendants to put up cash bail in misdemeanor or violent felony cases. A hearing date was scheduled for the next month, but she never showed up. And she's still out of custody with an active bench warrant. I just checked last week.
Wow.
Later, the police, just last week, I called the DA's office and the police to find out, what had happened. And they apologized that nothing had happened, but they also made it clear that this lady wasn't working alone. Very unlikely that she was working alone. She was working for somebody else who coordinated vulnerable individuals, somebody that the police chief called Lex Luthor. And so it's really, I came to see that it's really Lex Luthor they really need to be going after, not these individual mules who are doing the little work, or not only these people.
Wow, that's quite the story. Did you guys expect that she would have this much detailed information? This is what you get when you have a victim channel their energy and go into reporter mode. Linda, I know it's been a couple of years now, and I just want you to think with that hindsight, what are some of the lessons that you've learned that you want to share with everybody who's listening right now?
Well, I know, given what you guys have detailed already this morning, that my theft could be considered pretty minor. Lots of people lose hundreds of thousands of dollars and more to scammers and to fraudsters. And fortunately, I would have been okay financially if I never got my money back. But many people would not. They'd fall behind on their bills, and their problems would just keep piling on and piling on. And as you said, ultimately, it destroys lives. For me, it's agonizing still to lie awake at night and picture scenarios in which all my money is lost and my credit's ruined. I'm always living with dread. So I lost more than just my money that day. I lost, and this is very real, it sounds kind of hokey, but I did lose a sense of security and a significant sense of trust and well-being. I feel especially let down by my bank, which should have been more vigilant. When an older woman walks into a bank and asks to withdraw a large sum of money, which I have never done before, and so that doesn't fit my profile, that should have set off a warning bell. It did for other banks who were robbed by her. It's a classic profile of a scam in action. And why was there a long delay, such a long delay in admitting it was theft? As I said, they had a video transaction. Why didn't they just look at it?
Linda, you and I have had conversations about this notion of being made whole. And you alluded to that in what you just said. So I think we're at time. Yeah, we're just about at time. So in closing, what would you like to say about that? And what would you like people to know you'd like to see changed?
Well, I think that there should be some dedicated singular agency or group driving this country's anti-fraud strategy, as there is in other countries, such as Britain, for example. There's no fewer than a dozen federal government agency websites where you can report the crime to, and I didn't know where to start. What I'd like to see change is a more coordinated and compassionate and streamlined approach to helping victims, and a legal system that takes these crimes seriously enough to keep the same perpetrators from repeating the same crime over and over again.
Thanks, Linda. Do we have time for maybe one question? Does anybody have any questions or comments for Linda? You've stunned them, Linda. They don't know what to say. Oh, I see one in the back. John? I'll repeat this for those who are listening. John asked Linda, are you still a Bank of America customer?
I knew somebody was going to ask that. Yes. Why, you may ask? Because I don't know, I couldn't handle any more red tape.
One more thing. This is actually not an uncommon response. A lot of folks, especially when it's this draining for them, feel like making some of these proactive changes to help themselves is just one more thing that they have to do. And if they don't actually have to do it, they're going to focus on the things that they have to do rather than on those choices. And so your answer doesn't surprise me. I don't think it surprises John either. Nope. That's why he asked the question. I think we're at time. So everyone, would you please join me in thanking Linda for having the courage and bravery to share her story.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Linda.